Hey there, ready for a Jeep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're going to be looking at
Tulsi Gabbard?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
You might know her from her time in Congress or her presidential run, but trust me, there's a lot more to her story
Oh, yeah.
than meets the eye.
Definitely.
And we've got a stack of articles and social media posts to get through today.
Looking forward to it.
And let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty wild.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
Her story is incredibly fascinating.
It is.
Tulsi Gabbard's a bit of an enigma.
Okay.
And her personal life, particularly her religious background, is really deeply intertwined with her political journey.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What can you tell us about this group, the Science of Identity Foundation, that keeps popping up in connection with Gabbard?
So the Science of Identity Foundation, or SI, as it's often called, is a Hare Krishna offshoot.
Okay.
Founded by Chris Butler, also known as Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
All right.
He broke away from the mainstream Hare Krishna movement in the 70s.
Okay.
And established his own group in Hawaii.
Got it.
And that's where Tulsi Gabbard comes in. She was raised within this group.
Okay, so her connection to SAF is pretty deep.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about like casual membership here.
No.
What was it like growing up in this group?
So from what former members have shared, it seems like a pretty intense lifestyle.
Okay.
There were strict rules about diet, marriage, and even education.
Wow.
Children were often sent away to a boarding school in the Philippines,
Boy,
completely isolated from outside influences,
that's intense.
and immersed in Butler's teachings.
Wow, sending kids away to a school in another country.
Yeah.
That's a level of commitment you don't see every day.
Right.
But we're talking about a group that some sources are actually calling a cult. What are they basing those claims on?
So the accusations really stem from the level of control Butler allegedly exerted over his followers' lives. Former members have described a culture of fear and unquestioning obedience where Butler's word was law.
Wow.
There are also reports of financial irregularities and attempts to influence Hawaiian politics.
Hold on, political influence.
Right.
What are we talking about? Some kind of shadowy cabal here?
Well, not exactly a shadowy cabal,
Okay.
but SIF was quite active in Hawaiian politics,
Really?
particularly through a party called the Independence for Godly Government.
What?
Independence for Godly Government, or IGG.
What is this, like a political satire?
It might sound like something straight out of one,
Yeah.
but it was a real party, and a significant number of their candidates in the 1976 election were followers of SIF.
Wow. Okay, so now we're starting to see how Tulsi Gabbard's upbringing in SIF could have shaped her political views. She wasn't just like exposed to these beliefs.
Well,
she was practically raised in them.
Exactly, and that context is crucial when we start looking at her political career,
Right.
because her views have actually evolved quite dramatically over time. Initially, she aligned with SIF's more socially conservative positions,
Okay.
but then after her military service, she shifted towards more progressive stances.
That's quite a shift.
It is.
It makes you wonder what triggered that change.
Right.
And how much of her early political activity was truly her own versus influenced by SIF.
It's a question many people have raised, especially during her presidential run.
Yeah.
We see a lot of debate on social media about Tulsi's authenticity.
Right.
Some praise her as a courageous and independent voice,
Yeah.
while others see her as an opportunist who changes her tune to fit the political climate.
It's like there are two Tulsi Gabbards.
Right?
The progressive firebrand and the woman whose past raises questions about her true motivations. So how do we reconcile these two sides?
Yeah.
How do we understand the real Tulsi Gabbard?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is.
To understand any individual, let alone a politician, we need to consider their entire life story.
Okay.
Their beliefs, their actions, and how those have evolved over time. Right. You can't just cherry pick moments that fit a particular narrative.
All right, so we've established that Tulsi Gabbard's background in SIF is pretty significant.
Yeah.
But one of these articles mentions another intriguing connection, a link between SIF and a multi-level marketing company called QNet.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I've heard some whispers about QNet, and they're not exactly flattering.
Yeah. Q&It.
Yeah.
It's a company that's been accused of operating as a pyramid scheme
Oh.
and has faced legal issues in several countries.
Okay.
But what's particularly interesting here is the connection to SIF.
Okay.
One of QNet's co-founders, Joseph Bismark, also known as Japadas, is a devotee of Chris Butler.
Wow. Okay, so we're not just talking about like a philosophical connection here.
No.
There's an actual personal link between SIF and this controversial company.
That's right, and a financial one, too.
Really?
There's evidence of significant financial ties between the two.
Okay.
For example, SIF reported earning a huge chunk of its profit from a sale of stock connected to QNet. It all starts to look like a pretty tangled web.
So to really understand Tulsi Gabbard, we need to understand this complicated network of relationships and influences that have shaped her life.
Yeah.
It's not just about politics.
Yeah.
It's about faith, personal connections, and financial interests.
Absolutely.
This is getting deep.
And we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh, no.
We haven't even touched upon her controversial support for Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad.
Right.
Or her very public departure from the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
But we'll get to all of that soon enough.
All right, buckle up, everyone.
Yeah.
It seems like this deep dive into Tulsi Gabbard's world is going to take us down some unexpected paths.
Indeed, it will be a fascinating journey.
Yeah.
Her story raises some crucial questions about the role of faith in public life.
Okay.
The influence of personal beliefs on political actions, and the complexities of separating the two.
I'm ready to dive deeper. What else have we got?
Let's do it. So let's delve a bit deeper into life within SIF. We've got some anecdotes from former members that might shed some light on the culture and its potential influence on Tulsi.
You know, I'm still thinking about that boarding school in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Sending kids that far away for education just seems so drastic.
It does.
What was the thinking behind that?
Well, it seems the school located in a remote area was all about creating a highly controlled environment, free from outside influences.
Right.
The curriculum was saturated with Butler's teachings.
Wow.
And former students describe a very regimented lifestyle with strict discipline.
There's a Facebook post here from someone who claims to have attended the school.
Oh, wow.
They talk about being taught some pretty unsettling things like how fags are taking over. They even mention witnessing abuse.
It's definitely a disturbing account, and it points to an environment where specific ideologies were rigorously enforced.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a place where questioning authority was encouraged.
No, not at all. So let's bring this back to Tulsi Gabbard. We know she started out espousing some pretty conservative viewpoints, working with groups like the Alliance for Traditional Marriage, which her father founded.
Right.
This group actively campaigned against same-sex marriage.
Right, and that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It shows how deeply entrenched those beliefs were, not just within SIF, but within her own family.
Right.
Which makes her later shift on LGBTQ+ rights even more striking.
Because she did a complete 180 on that issue.
She did.
From opposing same-sex marriage to becoming a vocal advocate for LGBTQ+ equality.
Yeah.
That's not just a slight change of opinion, it's a total reversal.
It's a dramatic shift and one that sparked a lot of debate.
For sure.
Some see it as a sign of genuine growth.
Okay.
A willingness to challenge her own past and embrace a more progressive worldview.
Right.
Others view it with more cynicism, suggesting it was a calculated move for political gain.
It's hard to know what was going on in her head, but it's interesting that this shift happened after her military service. She's talked about how serving alongside LGBTQ+ soldiers changed her perspective.
That military experience seems to have been a turning point for her in many ways.
Yeah.
It exposed her to different viewpoints, different cultures, different ways of life.
Right.
And it probably challenged a lot of the assumptions she'd grown up with.
It makes you think about the power of life experiences to shape our beliefs. Even those that seem deeply ingrained can change when confronted with new realities.
For sure, and that's what makes Tulsi Gabbard such a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
She embodies the complexities of personal growth, the influence of environment, and the ever-evolving nature of our beliefs.
Speaking of evolving views, her foreign policy positions have also set her apart, often putting her at odds with her own party.
Absolutely. Her stance on Syria in particular drew a lot of criticism.
Okay.
She met with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad,
Wow.
expressed skepticism about his use of chemical weapons against his own people,
No way.
and called for an end to U.S. intervention in the Syrian civil war.
Didn't she actually refer to Assad as a reformer at one point?
She did.
That's a pretty bold statement, considering the widespread accusations of human rights abuses committed by his regime.
Yes. That comment raised a lot of eyebrows, and it's a prime example of how her foreign policy views have put her outside the mainstream.
Right.
Critics saw it as aligning herself with a brutal dictator and echoing pro-Assad propaganda, including talking points coming from Russia.
And there were already concerns about her ties to Russia.
Yeah.
Those allegations of her being a Russian asset, which, of course, she denied vehemently.
Right. Those accusations never really stuck.
Right.
But they added to the perception that she was sympathetic to Russia and its interests.
Yeah.
And this became even more problematic after Russia invaded Ukraine.
Right. And then there's her very public break from the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just a quiet exit. She went out with a bang.
It was a dramatic exit, for sure.
It was.
She had been increasingly critical of the Democratic establishment, accusing them of being out of touch and obsessed with identity politics. And then in 2022, she announced she was leaving the party, denouncing them as an elitist cabal of warmongers driven by cowardly wokenesses.
Wow, those are fighting words.
They are.
It's safe to say she burned some bridges there.
I think so.
So where does that leave her now? What's her next move?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Some speculate she's positioning herself for a run on the Republican ticket.
Okay.
While others believe she's aiming to carve out a niche as an independent voice appealing to voters disillusioned with both parties.
She's definitely unpredictable. And I have to admit, I'm curious to see what she does next. This whole QNet connection keeps coming back to me, though.
Yeah.
It's unsettling to think about religious organizations being entangled with potentially questionable financial interests.
It does raise questions about transparency and accountability, especially with groups like SAVE, where there's a history of secrecy and allegations of undue influence.
I also can't help but think about the power dynamics at play within these kinds of groups. It seems like Butler had an immense amount of control over his followers' lives.
That kind of guru figure with their devoted followers is something we see across many religious and spiritual movements.
Right.
It's important to be aware of the potential for exploitation in these situations.
Absolutely.
People should always feel empowered to question authority and think critically.
Especially when blind faith is being leveraged for financial gain or unquestioning loyalty. It all circles back to Tulsi, though. How much of her journey has been shaped by Butler's influence?
Right.
How much of it is her own agency? It's a tough question to answer.
It's a question that likely doesn't have a simple answer, but it's a question worth exploring as we try to understand this complex and contradictory figure.
It's easy to get caught up in the political intrigue, the controversies, the dramatic pronouncements, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a human being with a complex and evolving belief system.
Absolutely. We need to remember that even as we scrutinize her actions and affiliations, we can analyze her political decisions, her rhetoric, her alliances, without resorting to demonizing her or reducing her to a caricature.
Because everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And those stories are often messy and complicated. That's what makes them interesting.
It's those very complexities that make us want to understand people.
Right.
To unravel their motivations, to see the world through their eyes. And Tulsi Gabbard, with her unique journey and contradictory nature, certain gives us plenty to ponder.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still more to unpack.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in digging deeper into some of those specific controversies surrounding Tulsi's political career, like her support for Assad and her connections to right-wing figures. What insights can you offer on those aspects of her story? Okay, so let's talk about Tulsi's support for Bashar al-Assad.
Okay.
It's one of those things that really makes you scratch your head.
It is.
Here's a guy who's been accused of using chemical weapons on his own, people bombing hospitals, torturing and murdering dissidents. Like the list goes on and on of atrocities.
The list of alleged atrocities committed by the Assad regime is long and horrifying.
Right.
So it's understandable why so many people were baffled by Tulsi's willingness to engage with him.
Exactly. Like, what was her explanation for that?
Well, she framed it as a matter of pragmatism.
Okay.
She argued that the U.S. needed to prioritize defeating terrorist groups like ISIS,
Right.
even if it meant working with unsavory figures like Assad.
Okay.
She saw U.S. involvement in the Syrian civil war as a form of regime change, which she strongly opposed.
So kind of a the enemy of my enemy is my friend approach.
In a way, yes, but that stance put her squarely at odds with many in the Democratic Party who saw Assad as a war criminal and opposed any collaboration with his regime.
It does seem like a risky strategy, to put it mildly.
It certainly raised questions about her judgment and her willingness to align herself with authoritarian leaders.
Right, and it kind of played into those existing concerns about her ties to Russia.
Exactly.
Which were already under scrutiny because of her criticisms of U.S. foreign policy in Syria and elsewhere.
That's right.
Right, those allegations of her being a Russian asset, a term that gets thrown around a lot these days.
It does. Exactly. And While there wasn't any concrete evidence to support those claims, it did contribute to a perception of her as being sympathetic to Russia's interests.
Right, which of course became even more problematic after Russia invaded Ukraine.
It did.
Yeah. And then there are her connections to funkers on the right wing of American politics. People like Steve Bannon, the former Trump strategist. She's also appeared on Fox News quite a bit.
Those associations definitely blurred the lines and fueled speculation about her political allegiances.
Yeah.
It's hard to pin her down ideologically.
It's almost like she's playing both sides, you know? Deliberately courting controversy.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's a strategy that has certainly gotten her attention, but it's also alienated many within the Democratic Party.
Right.
And made it harder for her to build a solid base of support.
So after taking this deep dive into Tulsi Gabbard's world,
yeah,
where do you stand on her?
Honestly, she's a tough one to figure out.
Yeah.
She's clearly a smart and ambitious woman, and her life story is fascinating.
It is.
But her ties to Seth, her controversial foreign policy stances, her willingness to cozy up to the right, it all makes it hard to fully grasp her motivations or predict what she'll do next.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. It's like, we've got all these pieces of a puzzle, but we're still missing some crucial parts. We get glimpses of who she is, but the full picture remains elusive.
And maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Maybe there is no single real Tulsi Gabbard. Maybe she's constantly evolving, defying easy categorization.
I think you've hit on something there. It's that complexity that makes her so captivating and keeps us wanting to learn more. This whole deep dive has really been an eye-opener. And it's left me with more questions than answers.
It has.
What about you? What's one thing that really stuck with you from all of this?
For me, it's the Q&A connection.
Okay.
And the questions it raises about the intersection of faith and finances. It's a reminder that belief systems can be incredibly powerful. And that we should always be wary of anyone who might exploit that power for personal gain.
I totally agree. It makes you think about the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to groups that demand unquestioning loyalty or make grand promises.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a valuable lesson to take away from any deep dive. We should always be willing to question, to challenge,
to dig deeper.
And to form our own opinions based on the evidence.
Well said. This has been a wild ride. And I think we've all learned a lot about Tulsi Gabbard, the science of identity foundation, and the complex interplay between faith politics and personal ambition.
We have.
But for now, we'll have to leave it there.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And as always, keep those minds curious.